Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasam. So, continuing with readings from Payutto's Buddhadhamma, translated by Robin Moore. And today I'll be reading, continuing from chapter 11, Happiness, and this is H, Freedom to Choose from Various Forms of Happiness, page 867 to 871. And I'll just be reading, as I go through, I'll just be reading excerpts. And in the beginning, Payutto talks about Nibbana, and so after this I'll also be reading some sutta excerpts on the topic of Nibbana. Okay. Section H. Freedom to choose from various forms of happiness. Some people fear that if they reach Nibbana, they will no longer be able to enjoy sense pleasure. In response, one can say, fear not, if you reach Nibbana, you will experience abundant happiness, greater than any happiness you now know. You will have many kinds of happiness to choose from. If you wish to enjoy sense pleasures, you may, and you will enjoy them more than you do now, because nothing in the mind will exist to spoil their sweetness. But by answering in this way, other people may protest. How is it possible that someone who has realized Nibbana would return to enjoy sense pleasures? End quote. These are not matters one need worry about. They resolve themselves naturally and automatically. Those people who have realized Nibbana are optimally suited to enjoy all kinds of happiness. Which level of happiness they choose to experience is up to their own discretion. For example, it is well documented that individuals who have experienced the happiness of Nibbana access the four jhanas as in abiding at ease in the present. Ṭhitapañño sukha vihara. Having said this, it occurs naturally by itself that those persons who realize Nibbana do not seek out sense pleasures. This is not because they are unable to enjoy such pleasures, but rather they have no inclination to do so. They have no mental defilements which would prompt them to indulge in sensuality, and they have experienced superior states, and thus no longer see pleasurable sense objects as worthy of involvement. This is similar to some people's speculation that arahants, having clearly discerned the characteristic of non-self, the truth that human beings are comprised simply of a convergence of elements and possess no fixed lasting identity, may be able to kill others blamelessly. But this clear knowledge and vision of non-self only occurs when the defilement of hatred prompting one to kill has been eradicated. It is therefore impossible for arahants to kill. A comparison to awakened beings not seeking out sense pleasure is that of a person who was previously imprisoned. While in prison, the prisoner relied on certain activities or objects for amusement and entertainment as a way to forget about his discomfort and confinement. Later, when there is an opportunity to escape from prison, some people are so attached to the sources of entertainment that they refuse to leave, while others get caught in worry and indecision. Those who truly recognize and appreciate their freedom, however, will gradually disengage from those pleasurable activities, leave the prison, and soon let go of all longing for that state of incarceration. The Buddha himself earlier delighted in sense pleasure, and then later became familiar with more refined forms of happiness. both the happiness of jhana and the happiness of nibbana. He thus knew all forms of happiness. His teachings were shaped by his own direct experience, acting as a solid confirmation of the validity of these teachings. Let us review some of the disadvantages and flaws of sense pleasure when one compares it to more refined forms of happiness, in particular the happiness of nibbana. Just side note, so the disadvantages and flaws of sense pleasure has sections A through F, and I'll just be reading excerpts from that. A, the first disadvantage of sense pleasure: it creates a dependency on, even an enslavement to, external things. It is not free and independent. B, because sense pleasure depends on external sense objects, sight, sound, smells, taste, and intangibles, those people who indulge in sense pleasure effectively entrust their happiness along with their entire fate to these things. C, life tied up with sense pleasure revolves entirely around contact with the outside world, around contact between sense faculties and sense objects. This is an external, superficial dimension of life. Moreover, the endless search for sense pleasure is tiring and tedious. Internal, refined forms of happiness help to free people from this cycle of sense contact. They free people from an excessive reliance on the sense faculties. At the very least, they offer people a respite and rest, and introduce them to more profound aspects of their lives. D, because sense pleasure relies on external things, it requires sense objects to pass through the various sense bases in order to supply fuel for craving. If one does not obtain these desired things as fuel, one suffers. Internal, refined forms of happiness, however, do not rely on external things. Those people who are endowed with such happiness, although deprived of gratifying sense objects, still abide happily. Furthermore, because of this reliance on external things, those persons indulging in sense pleasures are unable to dwell unoccupied. If they are idle, they feel restless and feverish for things to experience. This restlessness and fever are true expressions of suffering. People who suffer this yearning and fever tend to deceive themselves by overlooking and ignoring this situation, and instead focus exclusively on whatever gratification they have been able to acquire. In addition, when people have found gratification, even if this involves highly agreeable objects, they are unable to enjoy this experience for long. If the experience becomes too prolonged, it becomes a form of endurance, and the happiness transforms into suffering. Sense pleasure thus relies on a continual change and variation of sense objects. And for this reason, the scriptures state that movement, iriyapata, conceals suffering. Those who have accessed more refined forms of happiness are not tormented by the fever of yearning. They are able to abide in a particular state of happiness for long periods of times, according to their wishes, as illustrated in the previous story of the Buddha and King Bimbisara. E, sense pleasure is shaped by and subject to craving. That is, it is related to one's habitually accumulated likes and dislikes, preferences and aversions. These likes and dislikes can fluctuate and are erratic. The same object or action may be liked by one person and disliked by another. One person may see it as a source of pleasure, another as a source of displeasure. This fluctuation is true even for a single individual. On one occasion one sees or hears something and is pleased, while on another occasion the same thing causes displeasure. And in the case that two people encounter the same object and both like it, this may lead to mutual aversion, since they both desire the same thing. These situations can cause conflict within an individual and animosity between people. They are the source of all sorts of trouble and affliction. Sense pleasure or material happiness is thus the opposite to internal, non-material happiness, which is available on any occasion. This latter happiness is invariably a boon. It bestows a sense of well-being and contentment to the person experiencing it, and it is beneficial to everyone who is involved. The greater the number of people who experience it, the better. Each individual enhances the happiness of others because there is nothing to vie for. It therefore leads to peace and to the end of problems. F. Sense pleasure is the result of gratification of craving. If craving arises but is left unsatisfied and unappeased, problems arise immediately. And now I'll skip to the end of this section. One very useful method for safely enjoying sense pleasures is for people to have some access to non-material happiness, which acts as an escape, nisarana. This escape is very effective for refining one's behavior generated by craving, or it helps to keep this behavior within wholesome boundaries. Happiness independent of material things stands in direct contrast to craving. It manifests when one is released from craving, and it exists without relying on craving. Anyone who dwells in this kind of happiness is immediately freed from the perils of craving. Because sense pleasure is flawed, can cause a great deal of harm, and is both cherished by and compelling for people, and need not be promoted. Therefore, the Buddha did not support the pursuit of sense pleasure, and he discouraged people from setting it as the goal of life. In Buddhism, the essential aim of performing wholesome deeds or making merit, whether this be through generosity, dana, moral conduct, sila, or cultivating the mind, bhavana, it is not to receive a reward in the form of sense pleasure, say of wealth, fame, respect, an entourage of followers, or rebirth in a heavenly realm. The true purpose of wholesome actions is to support spiritual development and to access true lasting happiness, which leads to a reduction of mental defilement, a disengagement from evil, and an elimination of craving, the source of suffering. The person engaging in good actions thus experiences deeper, more refined forms of happiness, up to the happiness of nibbana, which brings peace and well-being to the individual and to society. And then this section concludes with a quote from the Mahanidesa of the Khuddha Nikaya. Not for happiness tarnished by defilement, not for future birth, does a sage give gifts. Indeed, a sage gives gifts for the end of defilement, for the absence of future birth. Not for happiness tarnished by defilement, not for future birth, does a sage develop the jhanas. Indeed, a sage develops the jhanas for the end of defilement, for the absence of future birth. Aiming for the state of peace, in other words, nibbana, inclining in this direction, devoted to this state, a sage gifts gifts. Sages set nibbana as the goal, just as rivers head for the heart of the ocean. And now I'll be reading some quotes on nibbana. These translations are by Ajahn, and the first, I'll be reading various verses. First one is, these are from the Udana 2.1, page 40. This is the Buddha speaking. Blissful is solitude for one who's content, who has heard the Dhamma, who sees. Blissful is non-affliction with regard for the world, restraint for living beings. Blissful is dispassion with regard for the world, the overcoming of sensuality. But the subduing of the conceit, I am, that is truly the ultimate bliss. Udana 8.1, Unbinding. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi at Jeta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery. And on that occasion the Blessed One was instructing, urging, rousing, and encouraging the monks with Dhamma talk, concerned with unbinding. The monks, receptive, attentive, focusing their entire awareness, lending ear, listened to the Dhamma. Then, on realizing the significance of that, the Blessed One on that occasion exclaimed, "There is that dimension, monks, where there is neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor wind, neither dimension of the infinitude of space, nor dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, nor dimension of nothingness, nor dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, neither this world nor the next world, nor sun nor moon. And there, I say, there is neither coming nor going, nor staying, neither passing away nor arising, unestablished, unevolving, without support. This, just this, is the end of stress." Udana 8.3, Unbinding. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would not be the case that escape from the born, become, made, fabricated would be discerned. But precisely because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, escape from the born, become, made, fabricated is discerned. Now Ajahn Geoff has included on the next page verses from Itivutka 43. The born, become, produced, made, fabricated, impermanent, fabricated of aging and death, a nest of illnesses, perishing, coming into being through nourishment, and the guide, that is craving, is unfit for delight. The escape from that is calm, permanent, a sphere beyond conjecture, unborn, unproduced, the sorrowless, stainless state, the cessation of stressful qualities, stilling of fabrication's bliss. Udana 8.4, Unbinding. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi at Jeta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery. And on that occasion the Blessed One was instructing, urging, rousing, and encouraging the monks with Dhamma talk, concerned with unbinding. The monks, receptive, attentive, focusing their entire awareness, lending ear, listened to the Dhamma. Then, on realizing the significance of that, the Blessed One on that occasion exclaimed, "One who is dependent has wavering. One who is independent has no wavering. There being no wavering, there is calm. There being calm, there is no yearning. There being no yearning, there is no coming or going. There being no coming or going, there is no passing away or arising. There being no passing away or arising, there is neither a here nor a there, nor between the two. This, just this, is the end of stress." And finally, I'll be reading the 33 synonyms for Nibbana. And these are taken by, there's a repetitive section on the unfabricated in the Samyutta Nikaya, where it just keeps substituting a different synonym for Nibbana. And so I'll just be reading these as Ajahn Geoff's translation of the 33 synonyms. The unfabricated, the unbent, the effluent free, the true, the beyond, the subtle, very hard to see, the ageless, impermanence, the undecaying, the surfaceless, non-objectification, peace, the deathless, the exquisite, bliss, rest, the ending of craving, the amazing, the astounding, the secure, security, unbinding, the unafflicted, dispassion, purity, release, attachment-free, the island, shelter, the harbor, refuge, the ultimate. So these are the reflections for this morning.